Tell us, where did life start out for you?
Well, if you don't mind, I won't answer that straight away. I just want to
Okay.
say up front
Mm.
that it's been a great experience just researching this because I don't think we go back and look at our lives often enough.
Okay.
And I reckon I've had a great life, but that's my biased opinion.
Yep.
But to answer your question, it obviously started with my mum and dad.
Yeah.
And my mum was a South Australian girl, and she grew up with her dad as a Methodist minister, and they travelled around the countryside. And at some stage, my grandfather moved to Broken Hill as a minister, and mum followed because she'd finished school. She started nursing there, so she was a young woman at the stage. But my dad was a New South Wales teacher, and he'd just moved to from Coonabarabran to Broken Hill, and they went to church, obviously. So that's one big benefit of a church. They actually found each other there, and obviously things developed, and before you know it, they were engaged and then married. And my older brother, David, was born in Broken Hill, and then 18 months later, I was born in 1960, April 1960, and so the first year of my life was in Broken Hill. And surprisingly, I can't remember much about Broken Hill before the age of 1, but then we moved, Dad moved to Muswellbrook, teaching there in the high school, and we obviously moved as a family. And then my younger sister Jenny was born in Muswellbrook. And just generally, I'm talking about the preschool and primary school ages which were in Muswellbrook, but I just describe them as fantastic experience. Look, a really good childhood, and it's quite different from today. I think there was just more trust in the place, and parental supervision wasn't as strict, but that meant we could sort of go out and play. And we were lucky in our house. We were in a housing trust area, which I didn't know at the time because I didn't think about it, but we were in a little 2-bedroom house. 3 kids in 2 bedrooms. How does that work? But it had a partition between Jenny and 2 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
But our backyard went over a fence and into what we call the back paddock. And there were horses and cows out there from time to time, but just long grass, a creek, a big hill, and just an area for kids to play after school. And there would have been a dozen or so kids that would come and play, and all our mates, of course. And Dad actually made a big section out the back of our place so that the lawn was a bit lower and we could play cricket and just ball games there. But my experience generally of Muswellbrook was just a wonderful time. And, you know, as kids do, we play and you fight with your brother and sister and so forth like that, but it was just great. So,
I think we've got some photos for our those who are watching of your family in those early stages.
yeah, I think one's of Dad and 3 kids and one of Mum and 3 kids. But, yeah, my experience there, look, obviously things might have been happening in family, but being so young, you just think everything's great. And we had neighbours next door, the Moody's I'd go and play with, and others down the street, and like I said, there were horses and so forth. What I do remember is we had a tricycle, and we would come down this huge hill at the front of the house and get such great speed and sometimes crash. And funny enough, I've been back in recent years, and that big hill at the front was about 1 metre high. So it's amazing the way things sort of appear in your head. So it's just quite different. But there are a few funny stories in Muswellbrook. We were part of a church family, and that was important to Mum and Dad to sort of go to church, and they believed in God. And they would take us along as kids. And I really enjoyed that too, early Sunday school and so forth. Mm-hmm. But in Muswellbrook, we had about 6 families with kids, some of them our age, my brother and my age, and others with kids who are older, but we'd all go on picnics together and have a lot of fun. But one big story which I made a kids talk out of was when we'd go and see the Collards, one of the families, and he was a dairy farmer out of Muswellbrook. Mm-hmm. And I just loved going to see the dairy, and it was the old clunking sort of wheels and you know, the suction on the teats, and they'd take the milk and you'd go along there. And when we first went there, they were in barrels.
Right.
And they put the lids on it. Then the truck would come later and they put the barrels on there and take it to the milk factory. Mm-hmm. And later on it became a big vat. But what I remember is that we loved as kids. You could go and see little potty calves and you put your fingers in their mouth and they'd suck away, and you'd have just a great time there. And there was even a time when, I wanted to go there, but Dad said, no, I'm going with Mr. Colliday, you can't go. So I had to stay back at the farmhouse, and I was really upset about that. But I did as I was told because I was a good boy. Mm-hmm. But they went off and they were milking for quite a long time. I thought they must be back soon. Anyway, as happens in your mind, but I thought, well, maybe Dad said don't go into the dairy, but what if I just go near the dairy and have a look? Mm-hmm. So I kidded myself. I thought that'll be okay. And so I walked away and got closer and closer to the dairy. And, I thought, well, if he sees me, I know he said no to come, so he might be cross. So I'll just look through the side, a little hole in the side of the dairy. And so that's what I did. And as I got closer, I could hear this swooshing sound as well as the clunk of the machines. And I looked down to have a look through and see if I could see Mr. Collard and Dad and the cows. And then this great spray of water came through and splashed all over me. And what had actually happened is, if you know a dairy, but at the end of, while the cows are milking, they'll lift their tail quite often and do what they do. And at the end of the dairy time, Mr. Collard would get a big hose and swoosh around all the cow poo and everything like that. And then he'd get a big broom and sweep down, and where would he sweep it? Towards this little hole in the side. Go back to me, and I'm on the outside. And so I looked through just as he took the last swoosh, and all this cow poo water came through and drenched me. So what's a young boy to do? You suddenly realise you'd done the wrong thing. So
Yes.
as I did, I went and hid. And I thought, but I've got to do something. In the end, I sort of tried to wash myself off, but something about cow poo doesn't disappear.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't disappear, does it? So I ended up going back to the house, and I thought I'd be told off totally. But actually, Dad laughed, which was good of him. But he did tell me the story about, listening to your father and so forth. So I made that into a little parable about, we often sort of kid God. God says don't do this. We go and do it anyway. We think we know best. So that was my little story. But that's a true story. I've just embellished it a bit. But some of the good times there.
You obviously got the poop off you eventually.
Well, he washed me clean, which is another sort of parable sort of story. He can cleanse us from all our dirt and muck.
Did you stand outside and he just sprayed you with a
Actually
hose?
did with a hose, and the collards later said to me they felt sorry for me because it was a winter's day or something, and he just hosed me down. But anyway, it was my punishment, I suppose, for doing the wrong thing. Another story I do remember, like I keep saying I was a good kid, and I was, but amazing how you get into these things. With my little neighbour Tony Moody, we went out and we found some nails and we put them on the road out the front. Oh. I don't know what we were thinking.
I don't know either.
Just to see what would happen. But then this is even sillier. So that the drivers wouldn't see the nails, we covered it up with grass. But that just made it obvious. And so the first driver that came along stopped and got out and had a look what was going on. And then obviously went and told Tony's dad or my dad, I can't remember which, and we both got into trouble. But that's a bad story, isn't it? But even worse is that Tony Moody's dad was the local Goodyear Bow Repairs tyre man. And I reckon the story went around town. So it's just one of those sort of situations that's not so good.
Wow.
Yeah, be careful because he wants to make more money from you getting things
Yeah,
in your
exactly.
tyre.
So, anyway, we got into trouble for sure. So
Yeah.
So country life and a bit of mischief as a youngster.
Yeah. But overall, I just look back and say I couldn't have had a better childhood. There was sort of freedom there. I don't know about parental supervision. I don't remember Mum even looking over the back fence to see if we were all right, but she just sort of knew we would. I suppose one of the kids would have come and told a parent if someone had been bitten by a snake or fallen in the creek or anything like that, but it just didn't happen. We were just having a good time.
So at school, were you like the kid that put tacks on the teacher's table and
No.
did those sorts of things? Okay.
I do remember it's as early primary school, but I did get into trouble because they had a big quadrangle there where we all played sort of at recess, and then Mr. Ahern, I remember he was a senior teacher, he'd stand up, he'd say, they'd ring a bell and go ding, and then he'd say, fall in, and a bellow. Anyway, it was just a routine, and he'd rang the bell and said, and I yelled before him, I said, fall in. I was meant to do it at the same time as him, but he was a bit late. And so he heard me and thought that was being rude, which I guess it was, and said, you, up here, and I was in detention for the rest of the lesson. So, I keep saying I was a good boy, but you can get yourself into trouble if you're not careful.
A bit of mischief there, Peter.
The stories come out. Yeah.
Stories come out. Other than that, just a good time with my brother and sister. And as I said, lots of kids in the neighbourhood. So just had that feeling like that you're loved and things were good. And that's to do with my mum and dad. Of course, they were loving parents. And I still remember to this day that feeling of mum, especially coming and tuck us in bed, and she'd say a prayer with us. And I still sort of find that now, like even as an adult and married and so forth, but I still have that time at night when I go to bed and sort of talk to God, and it's just a good time. Yeah, it just makes things feel right. So.
What about Christmas and birthdays? What did they look like?
Well, they were fantastic, but as I said, Mum came from South Australia. Her family went back from Broken Hill to Adelaide, and so my grandfather was a minister in suburban Adelaide. So every Christmas, so that we could catch up with the family and cousins, we would head back over to Adelaide along the Hay Plains. I still remember that Hay Balranald Plains back then. It was so dry and hot. A lot more water there now, but we'd drive across and then have Christmas and New Year, and then go down to Victor Harbour and stay there in the caravan park and go to Port Elliot and swim. So it was a regular routine, and it was a good time. I do remember coming across and we'd go shopping before Christmas. We'd go into Rundle Mall. We'd go up Cox Foy's, which was not there now. We'd go up to the top floor and there's some Ferris wheel and other games there, and then we go down one more step and there was a cafeteria, and we'd get a pie and chips, the same thing every time we went there, and a drink, and felt we were fantastic. So these are memories, but they're simple memories, but just that whole time was just carefree and not a care in the world. So
good traditions. Yeah.
Thanks for watching this short clip of Life Bursts. Make sure that you hit the subscribe, like, and follow button. And for more, head to rawcut.com.au.